So what is social radically is to actually unplug, and the whole book is about unplugging the social. And so we thought that unplugging is done by actually looking at philosophy and most important social sciences differently.
Hello, everyone. Today is a very special program at the section Bookmark of Gulplok. It is very special because right in the end of 2019, a very important book which almost dawned upon us right before the pandemic broke out came out. And in this program, we are actually going to discuss that book, which is entitled Experience, Caste, and the Everyday Social. The authors of the book are Professor Gopal Guru and Professor Sundar Sarukkai, and we are very fortunate today here to have both the authors with us to discuss. Along with them, we have esteemed discussants, which includes Professor Sudipta Kaviraj, Professor Rita Kothari, and our very own Devnath Pathak. Anyone who will read the book would understand its impact in our everyday social life. Therefore, without any further ado, let me turn to Devnath Pathak and let's hear about the book, and then we move on to other discussions, and then finally the authors.
Just before we admitted the existence of a worldwide pandemic, in the middle of denial and disbelief, that I had started reading this book. For once, I harbored a bizarre speculation that the authors of this book are perhaps into some sort of black magic. When I had read Broken Mirror as a doctoral student over a decade ago, I knew that our teacher, Gopal Guru, was an intellectually disarming scholar and Sundar Sarukkai was endearingly convincing too. But it was in the time of pandemic with my deeply vulnerable self, like teeming billions all over the world, I was willing to speculate wildly. After all, the book came at a time when the idea of the social became the first victim of the coronavirus. Was it the doing of the authors of this book? Thankfully, this has not attracted the WhatsApp University. Otherwise, this book would have been seen in relations with China. Instead, as we can figure out, the book helps in understanding that the casualty of the social is inevitable given the nature of the social. It has been the easy casualty throughout human history if we sift through the annals. So no, the authors of this book are not into the black magic, even though parts of the book may give goosebumps since we witnessed the sensorium of social in the time of social distancing a little too sharply. We witnessed the multitude of social rather than a universal social at work in the wake of new normal. As our societal experience led us to recognize the colliding fragments, even while crying for a common cause, which was help us out of the risk. Even though each social aspired to maintain what they called positive feeling, each dealt with negativity in various degrees. Some socials indulged more brutally into orchestrations, and some revealed the heart-wrenching plight of the migrant workers, casual labor, and so on. This book is certainly not at all about pandemic or risk society, but every sentence in it helps the reader understand who we are and where we could head. Without obfuscating conceptual theoretical hideouts, which are popular amongst university academics, this book unravels too many avenues pertaining to the central issue of social experience and everyday to be easily summarized in this quick brush that I have undertaken. The social that was merely adjective in most of the social sciences becomes a prized noun in this book. And it contains within it, as the authors say, housewives, maids, children, women in the market, city sanitation workers, interaction around small shops and bakeries, little eating joints, auto drivers, public transport, and other such countless everyday things and processes around us. This social reaches to us through a phenomenological process as a concrete entity through our perceptual capacity of sight, touch, sound, smell, and taste, rather than as an abstract collection, which has been the case in most of the sociological and anthropological writings on the idea of social. Hence, many levels of performing social matters in this discourse. And musically performed social is one that seemed to attract the author duo in various parts of the book. Though they seem to avoid seeing the performative social in the domain of academic practices, somewhere in the book drawing a contrast between an academic lecture and a musical performance. But we are aware of the academia being a large theater of enactments, histrionics, and various kinds of plots to outdo each other. After all, a majority of academic social scientists speak or write critically of caste hierarchy, and they love to re-establish similar hierarchy in the universities of research or research organizations. I know many fake Marxists who write against an exploitative system of labor as well as education, but they happen to be happily a bully, ready to harass their colleagues and peers with sinister technocratic logic. Anyway, let me cut out my personal grudge that arises from a kind of social sphere called university, academia. At the center of this book is an ontology of a, if I can say, hydra-headed social. Ontology is here as primary as Searle had suggested. It comes with insights from diverse sides, mingling seamlessly. For example, neurobiology, set theory, mathematics, physics, sociology, anthropology, philosophy, politics, and deep readings, most importantly, of the marginalized, subaltern, caste-based experiences, and everything that matters in a sensible scholarship join hands in this book. This is hydra-headed social since it contains many layers within. You see, hear, touch many aspects of many socials. It has its everyday manifestations, performative dimensions, juridical and normative bearings. It is a source of reassurance and a ground for fierce contestations too. Unlike the social manufactured in the factory of the Enlightenment, which had made personal individuated more central, the social in South Asia entails para-individual structures. The question as to who is really the author of an experience, the experiencer who is compulsively in the situation of the experience, or the author of that experience who has a choice to step out from the situation of experience for a glass of wine at India International Center. The authorship becomes a hinge in parts of discussion in this book, reminding a reader of the debates in the previous book, The Cracked Mirror, as well as nudging a reader to revisit the notorious writing culture debate in anthropology, or the question that M.N. Srinivas handled with due intellectual diplomacy, if I can say, about insider and outsider, or even the locked horns of Roland Barthes and Michel Foucault on the idea of authorship. With this book, a reader begins to admit, along the line of the authorship, one begins to admit that the pronoun I is no longer the pure Cartesian self, the cogito, separable from the body. I of Gopal Guru and Sundar Sarukkai is so thankfully coalesced with pronouns we, you, they, just to name a few. The ever excitable learner in me jumps in jubilation to see through this book that we are all essentially naked in the hammam of everyday experience. Yet, Guru and Sarukkai do not step into the troubled waters of, for example, performed social, or even the question of transcendence beyond a point. The question of transcendence, which I expected, I was expecting someone well-versed in political philosophy to deal with more detail. What is the fear, say, for example, if one begins to detect the transcendental premise of a null set? The idea of null set is very central in the middle of the book. What if one begins to detect the transcendental premise of a null set, which the authors duly deem as the most important ontological term? Or what if we spot a realm of transcendental possibilities in the notion of social authority itself? That is, an authorless authority, according to the authors, Professor Guru and Sundar Sarukkai. If different socials exert authority in anonymous, non-agential manner, why not give premium to that social which keeps a sense of creative liminality and possibility of deviance alive? The authors do have an answer towards the end of the book. Since only the chains of servility are going to be lost, why not also dwell upon the domain of experience that has been largely left out for the mendicants of remote past, elementary performers such as Behrupiyas and Bhands and the artists of Swang and Tamasha and Lavani in the bardic civilizations, and now even the merchants masquerading as godmen and godwomen have been capitalizing on that set of ideas. In that line, as a student of this kind of material, I also think as to why is Sheldon Pollock far more central than A.L. Basham in exploring the texts and contexts of experience in South Asia? Why do we still not turn to the lost Ajivikas or Lokayatas, or even in Sanskrit tradition, a scholar like Srivara, who composed one of the volumes of Rajtarangani but was more monumental in Kathakautukam, which was a South Asian version of Maulana Jami's story of Yusuf and Julekha. Does it mean that Guru and Sarukkai have no utopias to toy with? Not at all. I will return to their utopias shortly, just like they turn to it toward the end of the book. The discursive trope of the book resonates with the larger body of discussions on structure and agency, society and individual, and everything that was said by the way of debating whether sum total of parts is equal to the whole or not. Individual, natural, biological, neurological seem to be adequately and intricately embedded in this notion of social that we perceptually arrive at. There is plenty of critical revisiting of Humayl Durkheim in order to find a point of departure. The book takes a quantum leap by centralizing the social as an everyday entity. As the authors write, the everyday social is the domain where the first experiences of the social are formed, and these experiences influence to a great extent other engagements with the structural social. This does not exclude, interestingly, the technologically mediated, socially anonymous, surrogate socials that we experienced during the pandemic, almost oscillating between sublime and ridiculous. The experiences of social translate into categories such as nation, religion, caste, and gender, as the authors in this book elucidate. Socialization thesis, structural agency thesis, and even social action and authority thesis succumb to a critical revisiting in the scheme of social. Individuality of individual, agential nature of the actors are recognized, but not reduced into a supreme category that was the case in the age-old modern social sciences. In his grave, I'm sure, I can imagine, Pierre Bourdieu must celebrate that a scholar duo from India have delivered a framework in which notorious antinomies of an orthodox social sciences is not perpetuated. How is this social perceived in everyday life? This is also a key concern in the book. As authors say, we smell, touch, and taste the social, and from this can try and understand something of the nature of social. There is a creative paradox for us to unravel along this line. Nothing is outside social vis-a-vis text and language. Yet experience of the social summons experiencer's body, experiencer's locations. It invites us to see an ontology of experience beyond the Cartesian framework, which has been prominent in academic writing, teaching, researching, and overall practices even today across South Asia. The modern European metaphysics distinguish the body of the subject who knows and the object that is known. That's a far-fetched metaphysics for a context where both subject and object belong, identify, and experience. In the sensorium of social, in the sensorium of the social in this book, we begin to see, smell, taste, hear everything from untouchability and humiliation to what the authors discuss as caste, as carapace. A new cartography of social vis-a-vis caste surfaces to the foreground, and we sense that sensorium of purity and pollution dominates even in sports, and not only in neighborhood settlements, food, music, and cultural consumptions inter alia. Since nothing is escapable from the social, there is no point in the wishful thinking of its demise, sudden or later. The point is to explore the possibility of any utopia which can help us build a healthy relationship amongst the many socials that we come across in this book. This also means identifying with due details anything that could be, as authors call, malignant social, that disrupts the transition from the basic emotions to the redemptive compassion. We return to such a relevant utopia, a reality-changing device in Karl Mannheim's sense, in this book toward the end. You cannot live a social life without such a change-oriented endeavor. Invoking Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's notion of Maitri, the authors remind us of the enormous possibilities about which we may have forgotten under the spate of anomalies. What kind of social could better facilitate in Maitri of the socials? It is by virtue of Maitri that differences can exist, discretion can have a role to play, and blockages could be removed. The author duo develop a prophetic hermeneutic of Maitri in which suffering leads to understanding, to a larger sphere of unconditional human interactions, as it did in Buddhism. The book will instantly make a reader curious about the relation of socials between the two authors of this book. What is the sense of respect, compassion, friendship that made the two scholars seamlessly flow into each other's social? This question is important for me personally, since I have, in my very short stint in academia, encountered many senior peers who expected me to be like servile subordinate rather than a respected intellectual partner. But with Guru and Sarukkai, I tend to get more hopeful, optimistic with the idea of Maitri, despite my festering wounds. Maitri is to reimagine a social world in which hierarchical ordering of moral values is eliminated. It is towards a future which will belong to academics, scholars, and everyday actors at once. Having said that, it means there is a chance for the third book in the trilogy that will give us more details about the actualization of such a wonderful utopian imagination, much needed for humanity.
Thank you so much, Dev Pathak, for opening the platform to an amazing discussion. Now I'm curious to hear from Professor Rita Kothari, hence I hand over the platform to her, and let's listen to what she has to speak about the book.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and Dev, thank you so much for making the job so eloquent and ready for me to step in now at this point, because unlike you, I'm actually doing a more selfish job, which is to talk about the way I travel with the book, to the way I relate to the book, rather than what the book is about, because I have been living with both Cracked Mirror and Experience and Everyday Social now ever since they both appeared in print. And I think I'm going to be a little informal compared to you, because there's a very deep kind of a personal relationship that I have formed with both the books. They speak to me very deeply, and they inform many arguments that I go on to make in a book that I'm writing at the moment, which I call Uneasy Translations, Language, Self, and Experience. So when the articles which later appeared in Cracked Mirror, when they made their first appearance in the EPW as a series of articles, I had not noticed them. But when I first heard Sundar in Ahmedabad around 2010 or 2011, and then got very involved in reading Cracked Mirror, and then I came to the second book, I think I can only describe that experience in an affective manner, which I have shared with both Gopal and Sundar, and I'm going to kind of repeat myself there. That the Cracked Mirror came to me as a very endearing book. I think it came to me as a startling revelation. And like all good theory, it provided a vocabulary. But also like better theory, it did that without taking away our own vocabulary. I think its strength lay in the fact that it provided a voice without cannibalizing the voices that existed in us. And I found myself aligning with the arguments of the Cracked Mirror very, very deeply. When I came to the second book, it didn't startle me. And for a moment, I didn't quite understand as to what was I responding to and what was happening here. But I think I've also realized now when I look back, and I've been traveling now with both the books, that if the first was endearing, the second book is enduring. I think what experience Caste Everyday Social did for me was to provide, and I usually don't like words like methods and methodologies, but I think what that book did for me was to provide, in some sense, a method or a methodology to understand what is essentially a flux, what is really ineffable, undescribable, uncapturable. And I think it is quite remarkable that the two authors managed to capture collage of experiences of everydayness, of the senses that imbue our everyday life, and how a certain semantics of living, a certain semantics of making sense of each other through the body, through the senses, through being both corporeal and also being distant, through both boundaries and distance, and how they actually managed to do that, I think is a remarkable feat. And I have now begun to see that this book actually comes closest, in some sense, to help me understand literature. Because literature, I think, more than anything else, actually mimics the everyday social the most, right? And literary theory does not provide us with this understanding. Literary theory has been predominantly metropolitan theory. And I'm not saying that one has only an ideological problem with its being metropolitan, but the fact is that literary theory has not given us this cluster of non-Western societies which the authors talk about. And they don't mention only the Indian context. They do talk about the Middle East and Africa and so on, although many examples are from India. But what literary theory manages to do is to actually, you mentioned, Dev, earlier, the categories of nation and of race and so gender and so on. What literary theory manages to do is to actually give us these as preemptive categories. And our students work with these preemptive categories without actually traversing through the social that the literary provides us. And in that sense, I find this book most useful to open up these conversations in a literature class. And so I've been doing that in almost every class, regardless of what I'm teaching. So even if I'm teaching a very mainstream text like Shashi Deshpande, for instance, whether it is Long Silence or Roots and Shadows and so on, the humming of the house, the sounds in the kitchen, the rustling of the cloth, right? There may be a woman who's menstruating. There may be a man who's coughing. There is a certain way by which these collage of sounds and of smells and of touches and the touched and the untouched, which we generally relegate only to our reading of Dalit literature. I think this book has enabled me to be able to decode that even in a text that will masquerade as a neutral text, that will be put in either a course on partition or that will be put in a course on Indian writing in English. But I think there is a certain way by which the method that Guru and Sarukkai provide, I think, has opened up immense possibilities for me to be able to provide the texture of the senses within the literary. So to give you a few examples here, for instance, I talked to Gopal about this, I think. I teach Samskara, right? Anantamurti Samskar. And really speaking, that text has been hailed as an anti-Brahminic text, which it is. I don't believe that it is an anti-caste text, but that's a different conversation. But, small things. For instance, the arguments from this book helped me to kind of talk to students and say, well, what do you think, what kind of chappals do you think Praneshacharya would be wearing? And this question was not only a trick question, but it is also meant to say as to what is the materiality, right, that surrounds the body, and what might be the associations of leather, of caste, of labor, of occupation that are related to this question. And in the process of asking that when he goes for his ablutions to the river and then walks back to his house and his feet touch the ground and he comes back and he's plucking the plants and then he goes and serves his wife, in all of this, we might be able to see that there is a series of actions which have to do with the way the body both observes and breaks boundaries every morning. And what are these regulations around the body? I think what these conversations do then is to kind of make it possible for us to see that even when a male narrator or a male protagonist like Praneshacharya is on an existential quest, and he begins to ask questions which we relate with modernity, questions which have to do with the self or the individual and the society, what we begin to see is that why does he find it so difficult? Because really speaking, what we have not understood is that Praneshacharya is not, as the authors point out, naively just an individual, right? And I love that word naively there, because individuals are not just naively individuals. They are already in the inside and the outside, in the body and the world. There is already a blurring that has happened. And if we don't understand that, we might think that Praneshacharya's quest is only a modernist one and only an existential one, without realizing that what Praneshacharya is also struggling with is disgust. He's struggling with the smells. He's struggling with the fact that he has managed to keep all these senses in abeyance. So it is not only about not having a physical relationship with anybody, or it is about sleeping with a Dalit woman, but it is also about the fact that the onslaught, the assault of senses has not been a part of his life. And that dislodges him more than the existential angst which has come to be associated with this book, because we think of Anantamurti being influenced by Sartre and so on and so forth. Let me kind of take you to a few other examples. And I don't know whether this is useful or not for the present forum, but I can only do what I can do, what my discipline trains me to do. And so I want to, for instance, let me take you to this film Manthan by Shyam Benegal, which some of you would have watched or would be familiar with. And I'm not here interested in the mimetic mode of what Manthan and Amul experiment have to do with each other or any of that. But let's just once again look at the social here. The authors talk about the multitude socials. You've got here, when the film begins, you've got a train that moves in, right, into the station. You've got a man who comes down, who's supposed to be Korean, right, coming to the Amul, starting the cooperative and so on. And he's dressed in this coat and so forth, looking like a Nehruvian figure, visiting a village, about to start a very modern operation of a cooperative. There is a song playing in the background, which is talking about him being Pardesi. Now, this idea about a Pardesi, or let's just say the prefix Par, which is sometimes used for Paragami, Parjat, Pardesi, and the sense that there is an outsiderness to it. What is that outsidedness? That outsidedness is also the fact that this man, who is well-meaning and upper caste Rao, and who wants to start this cooperative, has no understanding of what the social of this village is. And it is so evident in the facial expression. And I think these things are very important because we don't pay attention to it. It is important that when he first hears of caste in this village, you've got this Nasruddin Shah's character Bhola, and he says, "Hamari ye sisoti nahi banegi yahan pe." And it's very interesting that we are talking here of the social. The film actually relies so heavily upon the word society, which the Dalits in the village call sisoti, because they also own up a different idea of the society, the one which will have participation from these other castes that have hitherto not been given the chance. But this modern man cannot understand. And in that play of words between society and sisoti, what also opens up is the complete lack of comprehension, the bewilderment about what are some of the social forms that surround the lives of men and women who belong to these different castes. And I want to take you to one particular section in that novel, which I kind of in this film, which I've written about in a book. So there is this one instance when this Dr. Rao, who has arrived alone, but his wife joins him at some point because she's tired of waiting for the husband who's simply not turning up. So she joins him in this village. She's sitting on a swing, and this Dalit character Bhola, and the film calls Dalits Harijans here. So this Dalit character Bhola, Nasruddin Shah, he comes to that house to meet Nasruddin Shah. And I think this book is really, really useful for us to see this frame. And indulge me for a moment and stay with me as I describe this. Bhola is sitting on his haunches. You've got this upper caste woman who's sitting on the swing. She's looking at the Bhola. She puckers up her nose a little bit, almost as if she smells him. There is a certain look in her eyes, almost as if the sight of this man is unpleasant. I think we need to understand these forms of unpleasantness. We need to understand these forms of alienation, of disgust. What are some of these non-verbal ways by which someone is made to feel diminished, by which someone is made to feel dirty? And I think I will just kind of read out that particular section. So allow me to do this. Bhola, who's waiting for Rao at the entrance of the veranda of his house, offers a greeting to Shanta by folding his hands before quietly sitting down on his haunches on the floor. Shanta, who sits on a swing, acutely aware of and uncomfortable in the presence of a Harijan, flatly ignores his greeting. She scrunches up her nose in disgust and looks away haughtily, as if she had just caught a waft of an extremely unpleasant smell. Shanta then leaves the veranda to escape inside the house, and the camera pans to the now empty swing, still in the momentum. Bhola, who seems to be used to being treated as if he were invisible, does not seem affected by Shanta's rude dismissal. He remains seated on his haunches, unresponsive to Shanta's demeanor. Her sense of discomfort remains a diffused experience, an ineffable phenomenon where the reason behind Shanta's dismissal of Bhola's presence is understood but not easily articulated. Caste, as India's social reality, is located in our sense perceptions, especially in our sense of smell. And I'm quoting from the book here. Smell is a prominent mode of perceiving the social. This sense of smell does not only reveal the nature of the object, i.e., in this case, Bhola, but also the nature of the consciousness of the perceiver. Even though she displays his caste identity onto the Harijan seated on the floor, Shanta is acutely aware of the practices which allow her to maintain her caste identity, and her sense perception of caste difference hangs in the air like the odor she's repulsed by. And these are just kind of some examples. I would also like to kind of share with you an example from this famous film, Parasite. And those of you who have watched it again, the Korean film, you would remember that instance about smell. And you've got this man who's driving the car, Dong-ik, and you've got this rich, employer. The grammar of caste, I think, gets so unraveled through this book that I think that is, I mean, this is going to be kind of so helpful for us. And so Dongik says, where's that smell coming from? And Yongyo says, what smell? Mr. Kim's smell. Mr. Kim? Yeah. Not sure what you mean. Really? You must have smelt it. That smell that wafts through the car. How to describe it? An old man's smell? No, it's not that. What is it? Like an old radish. No? You know, when you boil a rag, it smells like that. Right? This is a human being talked about. And I think we have not had either the epistemology or the theoretical tools or the vocabulary to be able to capture these forms of the ineffable. I think one of the observations that I want to make to the book is perhaps we could have used more semiotics. Perhaps we could have paid more attention to language. And I think I kind of miss that a little bit. I'm trying to kind of push it myself whenever I'm engaging with the book. So let me give you one more example. This is not from literature, but this is from real life. A very well-known Dalit activist from Gujarat, and I'm sure because Gopal has spent time in Gujarat, he would have heard of him, Martin Makwan. He recently gave a talk to my class, and he made a very interesting comment, which ended by a statement that left many of my students quite flabbergasted. He said, everybody loves caste. But then before I tell you why he said that, Martin Makwan, who's a Vankar Christian, very well-known activist, and who went through a certain Jesuit education, began to describe how, as a part of being part of the Jesuit college, where even I taught for many years in Xavier's College, how Dalit students were given the broom on the very first or the second day to say, this place needs to be cleaned up. And he goes on to describe some experiences from the personal, demystifying thereby the entire emancipatory project of Jesuit education as far as caste is concerned, but also giving us one more example, and which is that when he first goes to the villages in Gujarat, and he says how every house had this tumbler outside the house, Ram Patra. Ram Patra is this particular tumbler that everybody keeps to use it to give water or chai or whatever to a low caste person. He found this tumbler outside Dalit homes also. For the moment, let's focus here on sight, which the book, I think, manages to kind of stay on the site somewhat briefly compared to some of the other senses. And I can understand why that might be the reason, because there has already been a lot of scholarship on sight. But the semiotics of this Rampatra, of this tumbler outside every home, including that of the Dalit, what is it actually doing, right? What is it actually saying? What it's saying is that there is always somebody who's lower than us in the hierarchy, right? And Martin Makwan uses this example to then say that everybody loves caste, which appears like a strange thing to say, but given the background that he's providing to us, we understand where this is going. I think the power of this visual, right? Not only the touching and the untouching through the tumbler, but also the power of the visual of outside the house, this Rampatra, is also, I think, a part of this collage of sensory experiences that the book talks about, right? And I want to kind of end by just one more brief example, and I think this is something that I'm struggling with. And this is what I'm struggling with, and I don't know whether I'm any closer to it, and which is actually thinking of the grammar of caste in a Muslim body. So, for instance, I'm thinking how, we think of caste and communalism as separate issues. Historians like Dilip Menon have already talked about in a very seminal article called The Blindness of Insight. Really speaking, when I now begin to teach partition literature, it is much more evident for me to see that how, once again, the bodies that don't touch, the bodies that give food at a distance, the bodies that avoid contact, right? The sense of smell, of taste, of touch, of food, what food is given, which plate, what kind of clothing, all of that begins to now create a sense for me that this business of the Hindu-Muslim relationship, which dominates us, our entire understanding of the Indian social, I think is only half the story. The story is really about what is the grammar of caste in this relationship. So, for instance, a very contemporary novel that I translated, which is about a Muslim woman looking for a house in Ahmedabad. But before she does that, she's growing up in a small village in Saurashtra. And this is just after Gujarat has been formed. And she's playing with her friends. And there is a little passage I have, but I don't know whether there is time for us to read it or not. But one of the teacher passes by as she sees this girl. And she sees this girl, and the novel describes to us how she thinks, "Arre, kaun hai? Who's this?" And someone says, "Ha ben enu naam Fatima hai." And she says, "Fatima, what kind of clothes are you wearing? Why are you looking so dirty? Look at your hair. Look at how you look." And Fatima is feeling completely gazed and watched. I think the business of the gaze is a very important one, right? Because the gaze is not generated only by the gazer, but it creates a circuit around it. And in fact, I think that has been actually one of my small disagreements with some of the articles in Humiliation, the book that Gopal has edited, which is that there is an entire circuit around it, right? Which is a spectacle around it. And what is happening is that this Muslim body is being constructed, perceived, sensed, smelt, noticed as a dirty body, as something which is unkempt. One of the other students says to the teacher, "Pasmita ben e to Musalman che," almost like that is an inherent explanation. And then Smita ben says, "Ha, toshu the gayu." And then she goes on to say in English, "But swachhata," and then she stops herself. And then she says, "Cleanliness is godliness." All these tropes of swachhata, of cleanliness, of dirt, of unkempt hair, of someone who's Fatima Lokhandwala, of someone whose father collects scraps, I think all that gets mobilized in that small visual. What are our means of understanding this? What are our means of actually trying to understand the elliptic syntax of caste? And I think caste is almost always elliptic, especially in a certain group. It can be very crude and out there on an everyday basis, but on some days, especially in the written word, it is very, very elliptic. And what are our means of opening that up, of talking about it, of understanding, and of sharing that with students? So my habitus really is a pedagogic one. My engagement is entirely through this pedagogy and through this method. And I think I want to wrap up for the moment here, but we can return later if there is
Thank you so
something.
much, Professor Rita Kothari. And now I'm sure, along with me, all of you are dying to listen to Professor Sudipta Kaviraj. So here it is. Over to you, sir. You tell us what you have to about the book.
I feel that I can take part in the discussion from a very different angle. Um, I live here now for a long time in the US, and um, I've read a book by Isabel Wilkerson called Caste. I would actually recommend the book to everybody who is interested in caste in India, because the book is not about caste. To my mind, it has nothing to do with caste. But what it does is, it is deeply about race. Um, it struggles with the history of race, and it struggles with a deeper question, which I assume Gopal and Sundar's work tries to do in India. That's why I regard it with great respect. It tries to ask Americans, how can we think about something like race? And sometimes what she suggests is that you can think about race by abandoning the conventional ways in which race has been thought about um, historically. So step into something which is very similar, but also radically different. And that might actually allow you to capture certain things about race, which you cannot do by simply looking at it through conventional race theory. So it is also essentially about the question of the disjunction of experience and the disjunction which exists at the heart of the social. I do not agree with the contemporary trend to think of enlightenment as a kind of big, uh, source of foolishness about everything. Um, I think the language that we are trying to use is a language that we take from the Enlightenment. It's very important, not to forget what we have learned, what I have learned from the teacher who taught me how to write Kokha Gogha in Bangla. I do not only write Kokha Gogha in Columbia University, but if he had not taught me, I would not have been able to do what I'm doing now. So I don't think it's actually very clever or decolonial or whatever to insult, to engage in this kind of casual insult of the Enlightenment. The reason I say that is that I think the language that what we are thinking about is something that first comes in German thinking through Hegel and Marx, especially Marx, in his section on estrangement of labor, where basically what he is saying is he is right into this question that the social is something which has two sides. The social has a structural side that the bourgeoisie cannot do without the proletariat and vice versa. But the social is not a sharing of what we call society. The social is a total disruption of an experiential access of the same social space or social structure or whatever you call it. So it's true that they both take part in what is called capitalist production. But when you go into experience, this is what this book is about. When you get into experience, it would be a travesty to say that they have any common experience of either the factory or the incomes which are generated by the factory, the experience that is enabled in you for your whole life. From the time you will be born, the furniture that you would be familiar with, the salary that you will get, the transport that you will use, and the coffin in which you will get to your grave, right? Everything is separated. So what is the social? So I personally feel that, it's a great question. And I think this is, in a sense, at the heart of a remark that I get in Ambedkar all the time. I think Ambedkar feels it very deeply. I don't think Ambedkar always articulates it very clearly. I think probably because of the intensity of emotion in Ambedkar. Ambedkar is an exceptionally clear thinker. This is what I particularly like about him. But I have given a lecture, I haven't published it yet, in which I have said that, one of the problems with Ambedkar, this is linked to the language that is used in the cracked mirror and also I found in this book. I think Ambedkar is trapped, not in a vulgar sense, trapped in the sense in which we are trapped in the language in which we express ourselves. Trapped in the sense that, the language is finite. If I know English, it allows me to express myself, but I do not know German. I do not know French. So it is trapped in that sense. It's a kind of imposition of certain kind of finitude of your exclusivity. Since Ambedkar is thinking inside the two languages of Marxism and liberalism, uh, both these languages make it harder in a certain sense to express this kind of affect. But anyway, I think so that is something that we should think about. And I think what we are trying to do through Cracked Mirror and this book is to try to get into that question, that remark. What does Ambedkar mean when he says that the Hindu does not have a society? And I find it much easier to understand that if I bring in that idea, which is not from Derrida, which is not from postmodern thinkers, it is straight from Marx. Right? So I'm deeply grateful to Marx for that. I'm not grateful to Marx for something that I haven't got from him. But I want to be clear about what I have got from Marx, what I have got from Hegel, what I have also got from Derrida and others. So suffering, why doesn't suffering lead to understanding? Let me give you an example of something which I sent to Gopal recently. It struck me after reading the Wilkerson book. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an event. It's a simple event. There's a very famous black actor here. His name is Forrest Whitaker. I'm not a great film buff, but people who would see American films would know him. He actually famously played Idi Amin in one of the a film on Idi Amin, but he's a very well-known, very distinguished actor, black actor. He went into a shop which I cross every day on my way to Colombia. It's called Milano Market. It sells Italian products, small shop. He went in there, and when he was getting out of the shop, he was stopped by one of the shop. It's not a huge shop, so it's not that there's a doorman or something. But somebody in the shop stopped him and wanted to check if he had shoplifted. So he was not subjected to a huge search or something, but he was stopped and uh, he was told that we want to check if you have shoplifted something. And then later on, he spoke to the newspaper, and this came out in the newspaper. It became a big story, right? And the shop apologized to him. But what struck me very powerfully was that, this is a shop where I go at least once every week to buy bread. And I felt that, I am black from the white point of view, from the point of view of of an Italian American serving in that shop. I'm also black, but I'm not black like Forrest Whitaker, right? He can make out from my demeanor, etc., that I probably teach in Columbia University. There are many, non-whites who teach in Columbia University, etc. I have never felt in my experience in the shop over the last 15, 16 years that I'm being watched for suspicion of shoplifting. So it alerted me to something which I'm trying to think about, which I think from the cursory look at the book, I felt that this also at the center of what Sundar and Gopal are trying to do. I've immediately felt about this, that, if Forrest Whitaker goes to another shop, how would he feel? He can spend 15 minutes in the shop. Every minute, every single moment of his being in that shop, he would feel that he might be watched, might be. Right? I'm not saying he is being watched, but he might be watched. When I go into Milano Market, I don't have that feeling. Right? And if Forrest Whitaker or somebody says that, I have this experience, right? That experience is very strange because it's not an experience of something that has happened. It's not an experience of an event. He's being stopped and asked, you have shoplifted, right? Is an event. In this case, there's no event. He's not being asked. Nobody is even suspecting him, right? But what I'm saying is that, this is an event for him. But the peculiarity is that it's an event. Event is not probably, I would not eventually use the term event. It's an experience for him. What I want to say is that it's an experience for him, but there's no event on which you can hang that experience. So if somebody says that you complain too much, these people didn't suspect you of shoplifting. You are unnecessarily accusing these people of being your accusers. They are not, right? I think that we do that all the time. At least we do that some of the time. But the problem is that, if you are on the other side of this kind of divide, then you would have a form of experience which can be eventless in this sense. And the reason I disagree with what you said, you didn't say it with this in mind. I'm simply using your phrase that suffering leads to understanding. This is suffering. This is what Marx has in mind. That he and I, we go through the same shop. So it is social. It is one aspect of sociality. But he and I do not have the same experience of the same shop. It is the other aspect of sociality. Both of these are in Marx, in enlightenment, right? Anyway, so I think that is what we should try to understand. And what I think the reason why I like Gopal and Sundar's work is that I think they are among the very few people who are trying to open this up. And I totally agree with Rita that what they're trying to do is to, this is the second point I want to make, which is about theory. And I would slightly disagree with Gopal, though this might not be a disagreement because I think I'm reasonably certain that Gopal would agree with me when I finish. But but in their book, there's a complaint about theory, which I both agree and disagree with. I agree that this is something which I think is, I don't think it even merits a discussion. It's really stupid idea that when people do intellectual activity of various kinds as academics, uh, some people do good empirical work, some people do something else, some people do theory. Theory is given a certain kind of prestige, precedence, etc. So I think that is something which is completely groundless. People have different types of minds. In fact, I have a son who's very good at mathematics. I was terrified by mathematics. He has a different kind of mind. In fact, he thinks that mathematics is a game. Even when he was a child, his mother once said that, why do you spend so much of time just sitting and doing math? So he said something very interesting to her. He said that, just as when you sing, you can sing for 3 hours and you would not see that as great effort, right? So because you enjoy it. So I also, when I do this, I enjoy it because it's not a great effort for me. But anyway, so that's a different question. I don't want to go into that. But I acknowledge that there is this sense that theory is something which is weightier, heavier, more important. I think theory is just a different kind of activity, which is important to understand, and it requires certain types of skills. But I don't think those skills actually deserve to be treated better or worse than any other kind of skill. I don't think theory is better. I also don't think theory is worse. A lot of people would say, theory is worthless. But what does theory do? I think theory, the reason why, in spite of Gopal saying that, what is Gopal doing? What is Gopal engaged in? Gopal is engaged in theory, right? Gopal is saying that, theory has this thing in Indian social science, which is true. But what is he doing? He's not doing empirical presentation of, caste experience, etc. He's doing theory. Why is he doing theory? I think doing theory basically means that we try to think about the most fundamental things with which we think. The language of our thought in a very broad sense, the argumentative language and the conceptual language. And so that is again something which I find very profound, very interesting in what they're doing. And that's why I totally agree with what Rita said. I think she put her finger on this when she says that they're trying to give us a new vocabulary. So whether they're able to give us a total vocabulary or not is a different question, right? But I think what they're trying to do is something that we should all participate in. There cannot be anybody who doesn't have experience, who doesn't experience the world. And the paradox is the moment we say that the experience is something which is the nearest to us, it also follows from that, if you follow this argument, that it also makes the society for us unexperienceable in a certain sense from somebody else's point of view. I think it's a great paradox. It basically, and this is why I have thought a lot about this intermittently. When Gopal was in JNU, that gave me an occasion to think about this. In London, I had a student who has also done well. His name is Sambaya Gundimeta. So Gopal knows about him. He writes about these issues. He would constantly, in our discussions, he would say, "Sir, you are upper caste. You don't understand this." And I tried to understand, what that meant. And so this is what I made out of it, that, it actually showed that either you say, this is actually the conventional social science, we are getting into deep methodological questions, because there is a kind of form of social science thinking which is not unaware of this, which would say, because of this, we want to bracket experience, don't go into experience, right? Keep social sciences objective, keep social sciences analytical, empirical, etc., statistical. And what is the methodological, philosophical justification for that? That is that it actually saves you from these entanglements with subjectivities and things, right? It makes it possible to talk. The moment you bring in experience, it makes it impossible to talk. So I think we who, however, believe that experience is a very important part of the social, and we should not accept that position that we should bracket the experiential. We should bring the experiential into it. I think we must understand what it means. And what it means is this: it actually makes that the experience of somebody else is unthinkable. Right? I personally feel that that is why we should also abandon another conventional argument in modern social science, objectivity, etc., that we should show much deeper interest in literature. Because literature is a technique. Literature is the technique of with words. Social science is with words. Social science happens in words. Literature also happens in words. And sometimes it seems that what happens in literature and social science, because they happen in words about society, both are about society. Think of a novel. They're very similar. I don't think they're similar. I think the social science should learn from literature, or learn in the sense we should ask what is happening in literature, which is not happening in my writing in social science. And what is happening in literature is the imaginative ability of literature, right? To give me something which is not somebody else's experience. Nobody can give me somebody else's experience. But literature can try to give me a word mediated picture of some kind, right? Um, it's a deficient picture, but a word mediated picture of somebody's experience. So if I say that I want to have that experience, realistically, if you want to use a big term ontologically, I cannot say that. But if somebody says that here is the word picture of that experience, try to understand it, right? It makes it possible for me to relate to it, to try to relate to it, right? Not to understand it, but to try to relate to it. So this is what I'll say, that what they're trying to do is one of the most fundamental tasks of modern social science, to understand the nature of the social, which from Marx's writing, Enlightenment writing, not post-Enlightenment writing, Enlightenment writing of one kind, not everybody. Hobbes does not do that. Locke does not. They do wonderful things, but they do not do this. It's very, very important to say that the the uh, the Bikaner wala shop that I'm talking about is in this part of the city. It's just elementary like that. You should you should say where you got something, right? So I got it from Marx, and I think what we get in Marx is so important, because anybody who is concerned with any profoundly divided society, unequal and divided society, has to face the problem of experience, that that society creates suffering, and suffering does not create understanding. Suffering does not lead to understanding. Suffering makes understanding impossible. It makes experience one-sided, very hard for the other person. It's easy for us to claim, I want to understand the experience of Forrest Whitaker. I think it's one of the most absurd things to say for me, who is a black man in America. I'm not a white man. To say that I understand uh, Forrest Whitaker's experience. Right? That, I think, is the task, the danger of bringing experience into our debate or phenomenology into the debate of philosophy, because that is precisely something that phenomenology tries to do. It tries to bring in what earlier philosophy bracketed. That's why it's not surprising that we get the term bracketing from Husserl. So experience does not lead to understanding. That is the problem. How do we try to resolve it? We try to resolve it by doing theory, and that is why it's most important that people who are experiencing this kind of suffering, they should engage in theory, which is not a Brahminical activity. It's a very profound basic activity. Yeah. And if you're concerned with basic things, Marx says that to be a radical is to go to the root of the matter. And for man, the root is man himself. So going to the root of the matter is theory. And so people who want to go to the root of the matter because they're troubled by suffering, they are, I would not say that they're the inheritors of theory. They do not inherit theory. They're actually cut off from theory. But they are the people who actually need theory the most, right? And finally, so we should do theory and we should do literature. And it's not easy. In fact, you do theory, you do one kind of thing. When you go into literature, it's a very different set of problems, because I'm very interested in the Kashmiri Shaivite rasa theory, etc., who have a wonderful theory of what the literary is, what is the imagination is producing. They believe that what imagination producing is not a fainter picture of the real, but it's a picture which is more than the real, which is more than the real. I genuinely believe that, and so people who are interested, who believe, like Rita, that literature actually gives us an entry into something like partition, or entry into something like untouchability, etc. I think they ought to, with people like us who are more interested in political philosophy, etc., engage in a discussion about what are we doing and what are we getting out of there. And I think if only we get people together to do this kind of thing, we'll get some kind of, we can make some preliminary steps in that direction. And I congratulate Sundar and Gopal, because they are among the very few people who are trying to do this. There are some people in the United States who do race theory and things like that. Black Marxists have done it for a very long time, not very successfully. But success is not given to anybody. You cannot be guaranteed success. The important thing is that you should understand what is an important thing to do. And I think that's why their whole undertaking, which started from humiliation and come to this, is so important for not only India, I think for the enterprise of social science generally.
Thank you so much, Professor Kaviraj. Having listened to all the three discussions, it is but natural to figure out what the authors have now to say. So, may I request Professor Gopal Guru and subsequently Professor Sundar Sarukkai to kindly lead us from light to light.
Dev, of course, has read the. I'm sorry, I was just saying, read the book so accurately and so insightfully that I think I am actually impressed by your presentation, taking the charge of Sudipta, that is languages from enlightenment. But I think we require this Sudipta for actually empowering ourselves and actually storm into the citadels of those people who actually control this language and impose it on us. So to that extent, I think I would actually go with Dev and use this. Similarly, I think the theory also, and I learned it from your classes, and that how important it is for us to really stand our eyes straight and head erect on the foot. So that was possible because we could really capture this while we are doing our studies in JNU and discussing with you. So this is the preliminary remark I would like to make. by way of appreciating your participation in this uh, conversation. And by the way, this is the third but very, very illuminating conversation. We had two before this. One was in Hyderabad, the other one was in Pune, and Pune was also very exciting. Milind Wakankar and Jayant Lel. I'm just mentioning these names just because they made a very important contribution to this intervention into this debate on caste experience and an everyday social. I would like I don't have much to say, but I would like to share with you that all your suggestions are well taken. I think Sundar will also agree with me. As a Dev didn't offer any critical comments, but we'll expect him to offer, like Sudipta and Rita. This will also help us getting into the third volume, so to say. If at all we are planning it, we have no plans these days, but we'll certainly plan the third, which is there. Maybe I must announce now that we are talking about religion, caste, and everyday social. But religion is a big area of investigation and inquiry that we have just deferred it for the moment. I think this book is also the continuation of the crack mirror, and Sudipta has made that point very clearly in his own writings on crack mirror. That you know, the crack mirror actually was political, if not social, and that's what we would argue. Why it was political? Because in the whole book, you find that the debate between me and Sundar Sarukkai is talking about plugging the repulsion, all these social infirmities, all those disgust, dirtiness, repulsion, all that is plugged into an untouchable here and the black person in the US. Who is plugging it and why is he plugging it? And I'm just saying he, sometimes she also. But there's a politics of plugging all this so that, and Sundar calls it as supplementing untouchability. But the source of untouchability is elsewhere. And so I think that plugging is political. So what is social radically is to unplug. And the whole book is about unplugging the social. And so we thought that unplugging is done by actually looking at philosophy and most important social sciences differently. And Dev and Rita have made that point very, very succinctly. That what, and I learned something from Sudipta in his classes on Althusser. And now what happens to the multi-level, multifaceted, very complex social when you actually reduce that whole social to structural explanations? And Dev has made that point very clearly that once you go into structural determination, you actually tend to lose the sight of the concrete being, and the concrete being which unfolds into different forms, as Rita said, in literature and all that, laughing, coughing, getting angry, smelling, that particular thing. But we have to take care, Sudip, so that we have to actually find out what is the exact relationship between philosophy and phenomenology. So that particular complexity, concreteness of a concrete being is lost in this reduction. And so we are expecting the Marxist scholars to actually, and you have already done your work, Sudipta, on Bangla literature every day. So we are aware. So I think there's a headway. You are going into that newness of Marxism. We are actually, this book was actually was imagined as a new Marxism by Parthasarthi from Hyderabad, Iflu University. He's a very bright scholar. But let's see whether Marxists can really be amenable to such kind of an invitation. So this is one. Second is this mainstream regular social scientist who actually reduce all the myriad multiple experiences to, and you are right, so the bracketing has done. And as they say, these people actually have created a kind of a habitus within which you have to follow the rules of social sciences. Rule following becomes important. And you, in your response to Isabella Wilkinson's, you made a very interesting point that the social scientists are actually anxious that their objectivity should not be disturbed by this kind of references. So aggregating, and we make that point in our introduction, that's the central point, that aggregation, assemblage, all these are the vocabularies of social sciences, but they tend to miss out all these nuances in their life. And as if, aggregate doesn't have continuity. Actually, experience itself is actually unfolds into continuity. Once you capture this continuity, you will get different kinds of understanding of the social. For example, the smelling, touching, sight, and seeing, all that is the part of which cannot be captured in this social science practice, which trains to bracket complex social reality. And you were right, Sudipta, when Whitaker, and I read that with great intensity, and I was trying to find out whether there's a similarity of experience. Once Whitaker enters into this bakery, he is actually he is rendered very, very ambiguous about his own personality. And actually, the very fact that the threshold is entered, that destroys the integrated human personality, morally integrated human personality. So he is on the tenterhooks all the time, people. So actually, when he's saying that, he's smelling the fellows around, just as a Dalit. So once walks into the staff room or a classroom, he gets the feeling that he's being smelled by people. So that is the experience you get, but you miss that out when you actually follow these social sciences in their endeavor to bracket experience. So, but I think we should keep that in mind on priority. We want to actually enrich our vocabulary. What is your source of enriching it? One is experience and our own tradition of thinking. And you just pick up and you meant, Dev also made that point. Sudipta, of course, has made that point in Vaishnavism. By the way, I must really propagate a question. Sudipta has done a wonderful work on Marxism and Vaishnavism, and I'm just pursuing to publish it in EPW, which he agrees, I think. I'm just getting the commitment right away. So that is the challenge to really produce this vocabulary from our own experience, from South Asia, from India, and we have enough resources in our own intellectual tradition, which are basically fundamentally critical. So I think that would certainly contribute to a new Marxism. So I'm really hopeful about it. About it. So so that is another idea we have got from this conversation. And we are feeling emboldened that we'll be definitely confidently work on it. And finally, and very finally, about this conversation on the very troubled relationship between the reason and emotions. I mean, the grammar of language in Ambedkar is absolutely brilliant. No one can really deny that. And once you start reading Ambedkar in English, wonderful, absolutely tightly argumentated, impeccable use of words and all that. You can see that there's, of course, the influence of the Enlightenment, but that, and he's not able to articulate social as because he is actually he's also kept caught by the strong hold of emotions. So I think once you extend emotion to moral, Sudipta, then moral can play an important role in terms of articulating the reasonable, the rational. But if it is alone, reason alone, then I think you may not really capture, you may not really make any headway. it is very necessary to really have emotion as a support to really guide your argument. And therefore, I think, and you, Rita, and your point is well taken, that from where do you get this emotion as a moral resource to really guide your reason? It's from literature, music, other things, conversation. All that is important. So I think, but there's ultimately there is a problem. Ultimately, there is a problem. And I made this point when Sundar reacted to my earlier work. I said, poetry is a very poor substitute for theory. But I have changed my position now. I think literature is so absolutely important to really do a good theory, if at all you want to do. And you are right, Sudipta. Why should we be bogged down by this theory concern because it brings you prestige and all that? But I'm attempting to really say that I am also a theorist to really make somebody uncomfortable. So that's a little politics involved in this, Oh, ये भी हमारे जैसे बोल रहा है. I mean, there's something very subaltern in it. The negative consciousness is created with a person. Insinuation. So all that is there. So we'll keep that in mind. All your very good suggestions, and I think it was a wonderful, very very elevated, illuminating conversation that we could. I personally, on behalf of Sundar, also feel that this is one of the best conversations that has ever happened on this book, second book. I hope Sudipta reaches and gives us very, very insightful comments and critique of this book later on. Because he can't say no, because his own training is in that. I have followed his West Bengal thing, so he can't say no now. So thank you so much, everybody, for a wonderful discussion on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now over to Professor Sarukkai. It's to you now to share with us about the book.
For the very gracious comments by all three of you. And I know that, in both for our cracked mirror and for this book and for the kinds of engagements that Gopal and me have been having with scholars and students around the country, there's been so much of warmth and openness and graciousness from all of you, even our worst critiques. So we are very happy that, I can share my gratitude with all of you for doing this. I think, and Gopal has always spoken very well about many of the points I would have wanted to say. But I just want to give a slight background so that, it ties in many of the questions which all of you raised. In particular, maybe I just go back one step behind and say, why did this book come about in some sense, right? So you can see that it is quite a different book from The Cracked Mirror. We were trying to do something else there. So all I want to say is to respond also to Professor Kaviraj's point and so on specifically, is that what made us come to this book were just very simple questions which we didn't understand and we wanted to understand. So it's more of a self-exploration. It's rather, the book is incidental actually, right? So Gopal, if I could say that, it's actually because that's how Gopal and me have been thinking and talking and working. We were not even thinking of a book. We were thinking about a very simple problem, which actually arose from something else we had done earlier after The Cracked Mirror, with the very interesting social science experiment with media. So there is this paper in Kannada called Prajavani, and some of you may know this, but in case Professor Kaviraj doesn't, it's a very well-known paper. It's a sister publication of Deccan Herald. And once we had met the publisher, Gopal and me were in this place called Neenasama Theatre Institute. It's a very rural Karnataka. It's been a great inspiration for both of us. We were talking to the publisher and we were talking about the Crackman and various questions about caste and Mr. Shantakumar. And, we were just tossing some ideas to him and he immediately agreed to a very, very radical idea. You know what he said? What he agreed to? He said, we told him, give us a page in your daily. It's as I said, very big Kannada newspaper here. Give us the center page of your paper once a week. And where Gopal and me will write on some topic about caste in the social world in Karnataka, in Kannada. And open the other half of the center spread to people's experiences of caste. We said, we have all been sitting and talking about it. I don't know what the people feel. We don't know what they are talking about, sitting in various villages and cities. And, this man, without batting an eyelid, said, I'll give it to you for 6 months. So for 6 months, in a daily political newspaper, the center spread, which is read by many politicians and others, he just said, you do what you want with it. And then they archived the thousands of letters which came from people all over Karnataka, all kinds of crazy, wonderful letters. And, I think it was, and that whole thing was published as a book by them in Kannada called Jati Samvada. We wrote a short report of it in EPW. Why I'm saying this is, when we encountered that, and in our own thing at Ninasam, where a lot of rural Karnataka people used to come, we found something very simple. Why is it that caste is so much a part of the way people understood themselves? And Gopal often talks about this example, which is there in the Jati Samvada. One woman from a small village in Karnataka, South Canara district, wrote a letter to the paper, to our discussion, asking, I belong to this caste. Can you please tell me what I should do to change that caste? Who should I go talk to change that caste? And it was an interesting thing. What I meant is, so for us, we began with the question of what makes caste sustainable. That's all. We did some discussion on tests and so on. We're going back to this question. So we went back to the question of what is this caste? And rather than asking, of course, there's so much great scholars have written about all this. We went back to the simple question of the sociality, as Professor Kaviraj was also saying, which is, okay, if everybody talks about caste as people coming together, what distinguishes the sociality of religious communities from caste socialities, from, organizational socialities and so on? What is it that makes us different when I sit with people of my caste as belonging to people of my religion or with my college or my institution? That's all. And we were just breaking our head, exploring in, as what Rita says, and she knows part of our own engagement with this. She's been in conversation with her, in a very literary sense sometimes, in a very performative sense with our engagement with, theater and so on. So it just went drifting, and we were gathering this thought, and we had no idea that this is the kind of formulation we would come, etc. But one thing began to concretize itself. Okay, and this, I agree entirely with what Professor Kaviraj is saying about theory and so on. But I think this is a point we take a strong stand on, and we may be wrong, and I'm sure other people will probably show the limitations of this point. Okay, so let me put it this way, just as a, polemical perhaps, but let me put it this way, that the experiences which characterize the socialities of societies like India, South Asia, Middle East, and Africa is qualitatively different from, we could call, whichever way you want to characterize it, the technological West, the quote-unquote developed West, or whatever it is, right? These are very, very problematical categories, which I'm sure you appreciate my difficulty in trying to articulate. But I want to say that my experience of my life, the way I make sense of my life, the way I live my day-to-day life is qualitatively different from even when I am there in the US or in Europe or any place like that. So we want to understand it. And we make the argument that the social theory as we understand it, with all its aims of universalization, etc., all that is very correct. We agree totally on it, is not able to capture something about these experiences of our societies. And therefore, this doesn't mean that we go back to experience as that category. In fact, I would argue that in this book, experience is a very different kind of a category than the cracked mirror. In the cracked mirror, experience is a category. Here, experience is a placeholder for something which allows us to look at a different form of understanding the sociality. Why is it that 5 people who don't know each other suddenly say they belong to a caste, and suddenly a notion of Venus appears? So this whole book is about the plural, if you like, and that's why when Dave was talking about the null set, etc., we're just going back not really to that kind of a discussion. It's as we see in the introduction, for example, we're just asking, what is it that makes 5 of us a we? Where is the notion of Venus? So that's been, as you know, all of you know very well, it's been much discussed in linguistics and philosophy, in so many other domains, sociology and so on. We just go back to this question through, taking, recourse to ideas, as we said, of the experience, the sensorium of the social, are sight, sound, and touch, etc. And the point here is, and this is probably what the point we're trying to say, many of the people who said they belong to social, same caste, the sense of Venus, actually, if you break it down, was nothing more than a collection of common sensory experiences. That's all. And it was very odd to us. How is this, why is it that a particular kind of social science theory cannot hold on to this as the foundation and then build it and go away from experience, as again Professor Kaviraj was repeatedly pointing out, and that's the Transcendence Day which you are also pointing out. It is integral to this. Yes, we do. It is the fact that I smell. We talk about communities by smell. We give so many examples of how we refer to communities through the smell, not just bad smell, good smell, etc. I mean, I know for in Bangalore, when they smell hing, for example, it's within Tamil Nadu, the way in which we associate Brahmins with hing and these other communities with the non-use of hing is so striking that we create our narratives of caste and our ontological sense of belongingness to caste through such terms. So we just begin just with this point, and I won't go further. Just the last point I make here is move, therefore, to the question with all the sense of our everyday life, the sounds and sights and smells around us, which constitutes our primary experience of what it is to be social. We are not taught to what it is to be social by the government, by the family, etc. So we are making this point. It is just that when I hear the sounds, hear the smells, etc., we form an idea of it, which I then bring it out onto the society. So we understand the word social that way. I understand the police departments in the way I understand the sociality of smells around, smell, touch, taste, etc. around me. So those are the kinds of arguments we're making. And primarily we are pushing at this to ask the question, why does caste have this invisible authority? So many cases. Why is it that you don't know who is making them do it? They say, we have to do it. So we go back to the old invisible hand argument from a completely different direction and reflect on this. And as they've said, utopian or not, it's also a very theoretical understanding of where does Maitri come from. Because I think at one level, both Gopal and me, in a sense, it also answers Dave's point about how we engaged as authors or friends or whatever. Maitri is so special. We are both very optimistic. We believe in people, in the humanity of people, and we don't, we know that there are all kinds of cruelty around us, but there is something so much to be got out of looking at the notions of Maitri between different socials. So I agree that would be, the maybe utopian in that sense, but it is actually, to what Rita was also saying, speaking so much, if it's not just about literature, just about stories and ways of living, ways of being. I just want a quick clarification, Dave, when you said about suffering and stuff. There is in our last sense, what we are making, just to clarify, since so the Kaviraj was talking about it. The point is, we were talking about how you understand a society. So we're making a distinction between being with as a very important form of sociality as against knowing others. So I may be in a group of people where I know everybody's CV, but they may never form the kind of the social with an unarticulated and, as Rita was saying, an ineffable, inexpressible we-ness, a being with. And suffering is not about conversion. It's not about the dichotomy between suffering and knowledge. It's about the suffering and being with. The question of the sociality arises as how I am with other people, even though we may all be very silent. So some kind of a thing, just to clarify a very small part. It was a great experience. And as I said, the point for us also has been that how do we, now with this Wilkerson's book, which, as you pointed out, the only thing which, I do have my problems with that book, but leaving that aside, it's of course an important one. Part of it is the appropriation of caste now away into the American Academy, in the sense, now it's no longer a topic which we, belongs to us, and quote unquote. I'm just saying it very facetiously. But, now, of course, the big guns of American Academia will now take that topic also away from us. The only way I should probably end with this is, when Bruno Latour had come once to Bangalore, we had some talks here, there, etc. And, he, of course, is prided himself on his book, We Have Never Been Modern, because, that was the point about he wants to say about Europe. So I told him, look, at least earlier you used to tell all of you, Asian societies were all irrational and not modern. Now, by saying this, you have taken away that also from us. We are left with neither do have you modern, neither now you are also both, we are not even modern. So, so anyway, I think that was the kind of, it's still an opening thinking effort. And as Gopal said, we now really been thinking about question of making sense of religion. So to us, so much in the book is about learning something for ourselves and hoping that if we have found some small insights, somebody else might find some insights. And such generous people like Rita, Dave, and you have been allowing us this greater, confidence to uh, go get on to that religion thing soon, Gopal. I think after listening to them, I think we should think of that book now. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sarukkai. Now I would like to return to my discussants. If any of the discussants would like to add a one-liner which they must have reflected upon while listening to the authors, may present to us.
My one liner is I'll reread the book.
Yeah.
Socials. It is in being with these small acts, which are not acts of kindness, but which are acts of every day, that we might find a certain surrogate, but a non-condescending way of actually being with each other. And maybe that is what Maitri is.
I'll say two one-liners and make a couple of points very quickly. The first one-liner is that I shall read the book. The second is that I'm actually deeply committed to Marx, not to Marxists. What I said should be taken literally. I did not mean that I embrace the entire Marxist tradition. But I think that point that, the social has two sides. The social has a structural, intrication of people into something which is unseverable structurally, but it does not give you a commonality of experience. I find that in Marx for the first time. I don't find it in Hegel. I don't find it in anyone else. So that's what I was saying, that, and it's important to remember that. The two other points, very quickly, I just finished writing a paper on the concept of the community, because there's a lot of discussion here now. Again, this is a discussion which comes up periodically about the loss of community, and especially because of Black Lives Matter and this deeply disturbing experience of Trump over 4 years. It really troubled people. So there's a revival of a discussion of community. I wrote a paper which will come out. I can send it to you if you're interested. But what the paper does is something which is very similar to what you mentioned, Sundar. And I think that is exactly the right way to do. In the paper, I say that, let me give you a comparison between two books. One is a very influential liberal book, Liberal Political Theory, by Robert Putnam. It's called Bowling Alone. It is about the revival of community in America. Look at the book, you will see that, he asks this question that you raised: what makes us a we in different settings? And then he gives a long list of political participation, civic municipal participation, participation in the workplace, etc., etc. About 10 different settings in which we are put together with other people and encouraged to say that we are a we, in some sense. But these are all very different. Now, Putnam, the advantage of Putnam's book is that, he doesn't classify these things. He simply gives us a flat list. But the advantage is that he has a huge body of sociological data, which he then tries to marshal, right? What struck me was that, Putnam simply is at least not using the elementary move that you get in Hegel, who said that there are three essential forms of sociability, which makes us we. One is family, one is the capitalist economy, and the third is the state. And we need the state because the capitalist economy, I think this is the something that it gets from Adam Smith, and you can also see a beginning of something that is comes out in Marx, that the capitalist economy does not make us doesn't bring us together. It simply brings us together in order to exploit each other, and that is why it cannot generate a sense of community. That's why we need the state, which creates a sense of community. But the interesting thing is that there is an attempt there to do something which we must do, and this is what you are also doing in getting together those people to respond to your, to the newspaper column. That what Hegel does is he simply says what is community, and to go into the basic, and then say that let us try to understand what is the content of this we in different types of settings, and then he theorizes. Obviously, what he theorizes cannot apply to us. It's a historically totally different society. So for me, this is a persistent problem with me. For me, following Hegel does not mean trying to think about our society through family, civil society, and the state. Following Hegel for me means doing what Hegel is trying to do when he's thinking about that. That he's simply saying that let us go back to the basic, that's the rock bottom in a certain sense, and ask what is the content of the we. When people use the term we, there cannot be a human being who doesn't have a conception of the we, doesn't use the word from time to time. And let us ask him to tell us what is the content of that we when he uses it in different settings. So I think what you are doing is not really valuable. I think that is exactly the way in which theory should be done. This is what I mean, what I meant, that this is what I think is, this is what the activity of theory is.
Thank you. Yeah.
That is what theory is, because theory is disregarding the theory that has been given to you. Yeah. To go down into the basics and then ask the question, does it work for me? If it works for me, of course I should use it. Right? If I get something from Abhinava or something, if it works for me, of course I use it. Right? But if it does not work for me, because it is historical, right, then I should do what they have done. Right? Which means that I should not do what he has done. So unless it's a totally abstract, totally philosophical thing, what is linguistic meaning? Of course I'll look at Derrida. Of course I'll look at Husserl. Just as I can look at Bhartrihari. Right? These are all different types of totally abstract philosophical positions. But when I come to anything which is social, which is historical, right? So when you go down to the basic, the only way in which we can come out to do theory is to ask the question, does that theory work for me? If it doesn't, then to do theory for myself. Right. What I cannot understand about Indian social science is why people do not understand this absolutely simple thing. Yeah. And so theory essentially becomes, I'm a great admirer of Bhudev Mukhopadhyay. He said something which I always remember. He said that what students are learning in Kolkata University is not science. They're not learning how to do science. They're learning to tell stories about European science. Mm. So he said that they can tell you what the weather was like when Faraday was making his experiment. But they cannot make an elementary experiment themselves. Yeah. So he said, I do not believe that they're learning science. They're learning stories of European science. That would never give us science. Yeah. Right? So I think it's very similar in a certain sense. And I think it's basically something which is very simple.
Yeah. Sorry, just a quick point I wanted to add. Thank you for this. This is a very important, entry into our discussion. As I said, our own struggles with trying to formulate the we, given the various kinds of politics around it. And actually, one of the things we come back to where there is one overlap with the Hegelian is the question of family, because we know it's impossible to talk about the Indian social the family. And and if there is anything which we may think might have a little bit of value in what we are doing with this whole exercise, which also moves a little bit away from the Marxian, but also very, as you were saying, very neo-Marxist, was our argument that the social science tendency to look at the social and the individual as polar opposites, as some, as binaries, is actually replaced by a tripartite relationship between social, the individual, and the natural. And what we discover through the empirical example is every invocation of social, including particularly the caste groups and the religious thing, there is a construction of the natural which underlies the social. So, which means it's you can never talk about a social, not just that's why that's how we get out of the experience thing. We are not talking about the fact that I have the experience, you have the experience, we can never come be we. And as you very correctly said, like in the Marxian, experience is not the grounding for the Venus that all of us have to have the same experience. No, but it is this construction of the natural as a group, as a community, which is created. And we show various examples how even different social science disciplines construct their own types of definition of natural in order to call themselves as belonging to social science. I just wanted to add that point to what you're saying. Thank you so much.
There are 102 farms in Gujarat, 102 farms of untouchability in Gujarat. So that aggregate comes to me. So that doesn't mean that we are sharing. You are sharing that experience only through mind, through literature, through abstraction. But what is important is to really negotiate with this. So words are mediating because they are mediating, they are actually dealing with the concrete reality. Otherwise, that mediation has no meaning. So the words need to be informed by what is happening, and experience is not. The bourgeoisie takes a lot of care to see that experience is always different and diverse. If it is one, then I think accumulation of experience will always bring it down. So that's the Marxist funda that we learn. So I think our Marxist practice in our country has been so mechanical that it imposes the solidarity, which doesn't exist at all. And so that's the point I thought I should make.
Thank you so much, the authors and all the esteemed discussants for joining us in this session today. Well, my platter is full for tonight, and I'm sure yours too. So see you all very soon when you are empty stomach later. Thank you so much.